this presentation of UNIDO's flagship publication, the Industrial Development Report, IDR 2018. You all know that IDR series have been the established source of the reference on industrial development. It's a flagship publication for UNIDO for so many years, and a good reference for international community to collect useful data, information for their strategic design for industrial development, also for some other studies and research. Earlier editions examined the driving forces of industrialization and the positive factors that will lead to a social inclusiveness and environmental sustainability. They also describe the crucial components of the production side of industrialization, such as capacity building, energy efficiency, and employment creation, technological change, to mention just a few of them. The 2018 edition of IDR has a little bit of change. It captures a different dimension of industrialization that has yet to be explored, the consumption of manufactured goods. Why is the consumption important? Understanding the consumption side of industrial development is essential to fully grasp the diversity and also impact of the industrialization. Industrial development brings important benefits to consumers and can significantly improve their living standards and well-being. Industrialization unleashes dynamic, competitive economic forces that generate employment and income, which is very important for economic growth, and facilitate international trade and enable efficient use of resources. As such, it is a major driver for poverty alleviation and shared prosperity. For the first time, the IDR provides the evidence-based framework that captures the interactive nature of manufacturing consumption and industrial development. Since the first industrial revolution, manufacturing has changed our lives in a radical way, and so many countries actually become advanced, industrialized, and many activities of our daily lives would have been impossible to imagine without technological breakthroughs in manufacturing, from the introduction of cars and the washing machines and to the distribution of computers. Computer comes out, and more recently smartphones and 3D printers. Actually, so many things could be printed by machine, not through other manufacturing activity. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, UNIDO's vision is that no one should be left behind in benefiting from the industrial development, from industrial activities, entrepreneurship. The prosperity that it creates should be shared among all people in all countries. As the report highlights, for this to happen, countries need to be involved in the process of industrialization. So industrialization is a key for economic activities. Industrialization could lead us to create more jobs, more income, more growth, and then lead us to the poverty alleviation. So this requires building industrial capability. This is a must to serve the new and increasingly sophisticated demands from the consumers. And in addition, industrial development needs to take place in an environmentally sustainable manner. Increased consumption of new products can add pressures on the environment. These pressures can be mitigated through the environmental interventions in manufacturing industries that lead to the production of environmental goods, and technology for cleaner industrial production already exists, and we call green industries. Green industry can be promoted to deliver environmental goods and services. Colleagues, friends, a key message of this report, IDR 2018, is that the development of these industries require major shifts in the consumption pattern towards the purchase of environmental goods and services. Existing barriers should be removed to allow the widespread consumption. These barriers including too high the prices, gaps in consumer awareness of the environmental concerns, and the biases in the purchasing behavior. The IDR 2018 also details some possible policy interventions. Countries can adopt different policy tools to accelerate the demand for manufactured goods that support inclusive and sustainable industrialization. For example, the national government can assume distinct tools or roles that actively engage with private sector and other stakeholders, thereby acknowledging the role of the private sector as a driver of industrialization. Colleagues, friends, the IDR 2018 reaffirms the commitment of UNIDO, of this organization, in supporting inclusive and sustainable industrial development as we bring the consumption dimension to the analysis of the industrial development. I highly appreciate this excellent job done by our IDR team, staff of departments of the policy, research and statistics, as well as our international experts in producing this important report, which displays the added value towards sustainable development. It's a very important literature piece to actually enlarge our vision, increase our knowledge, and to see how that industrialization and connected to the production and the consumption. It's really a right time to present this important piece to international community while the e-commerce, while the new industrial revolution, while digital infrastructure and being so widely spread, this is certainly is one of the contribution to be moving together with all the new initiatives. Thank you very much for your participation, colleagues, friends, and I really hope this panel will give you more knowledge about this IDR report. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cecilia Estrada is reasonably new here at UNIDO, so it is a bit of a baptism of fire, but she is now the Director of the Department of Policy, Research and Statistics here, and it is her job to just take us through some of the key findings of the report. Cecilia.
Director General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is a big pleasure and an honor for me to be standing in front of you to make this introduction of the Industrial Development Report 2018. I'm going to try to be brief because I know otherwise I'm going to get a nasty look from the rest of the members of the panel, so I don't want really to steal anybody's time. But my job here will be basically to try to provide you with an overview, a context basically, under which this report, this 2018 report has been produced. I forgot my... So basically, I just wanted to introduce you to the whole series of the industrial development reports. The theme of this year, the HDR, the IDR, which I really think is a very important one, is coming really to complete a cycle, and also the importance of the demand side of the consumption for the whole debate currently ongoing on the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Industrial Development Report has a long tradition, right? This is a series of publications that started in the year 2002, and so far have been 8 full reports, the way we know it now, that has been published. Basically, the whole idea that was ingrained in the production of this report is really to situate UNIDO at the hard core of the industrial policy debate, and basically the development policies that were, at the beginning of the year 2000 were really, really ongoing and very heated. We have to really situate ourselves. It was not too long ago, in the year 1998, that Joseph Stiglitz had for the first time addressed his lecture to the world, basically, talking about the post-Washington consensus, where you all know, actually development practitioners know, that was really the key starting point from which we basically took out, the industrial policy debate towards a more prominent role. Until that time, really, the industrial policy had been something that we preferred not really to talk about, because we were really neoclassical economists, and we really believed that, the markets were going to be doing their own job without really having industrial policy. So really, at the time that the first IDR was launched, it was really this debate, at the hardcore of this debate. The report was presented in the year 2002, and it really started talking about very crucial issues like learning, issues like hardcore capacity development, issues of innovation, that were really supposed to be sort of starting the debate in order how to make industrialization influence the whole process of economic growth. I'm not going to go into details of all the reports, right? I mean, you have them in the web page, but I think it's very important to notice that each of the reports carry a single message that really link the report with the current development debates. The second report was actually launched after the MDGs, so it was the first report that was actually talking about the linkages between industrialization and poverty reduction. And this was focused really in sub-Saharan Africa, because at the time it was seen that UNIDO really need to talk about, and especially to that, to the constituency in Africa in order to spur development. The report was about capacity development. The fourth report was about the bottom million. So this report was also very interesting because it was launched in 2009. At the time, we all know we were going again under a deep economic crisis, financial crisis, and where everybody was thinking about, okay, what is this globalization about? How is it not really living up to expectations? Why is it, recurring crisis, persistence of poverty? And there in the middle, we had this report that really was talking about loud and strong about industrialization and the good of industrialization for economic development. Then, of course, you will have the 3 last reports before the 2018, and these are the ones that also, I think, correspond to the paradigm of sustainable development. The report on 2011 talks about energy. The report on 2013 talks about employment creation, and then the 2016 on technology and innovation. As you can really see, the reports progressively starting addressing the key issues of saying, a little bit the conventional wisdom. What is this technology about? Is manufacturing really good? Things that we were talking before even coming to this plenary. Is really manufacturing good for growth? How is it going to be addressed for developing countries? Yeah? And then, of course, we have our new IDR, the 2018, that is really trying to address something that we didn't do before. It was talking about demand. How demand can really bring about the virtuous circle of industrialization, growth, and poverty alleviation. So I think really, the most important probably message of this report is although we are really at UNIDO and talking about industrial policies, there is the other part of the circle, the virtuous circle, that we probably may need to start thinking about on how to influence in an indirect way. So I think it's also important to realize that this report is being launched, in the midst of, the initial discussions on the Agenda 2030. And the Agenda 2030 also, for the first time, is addressing demand. And then there are many aspects of this new report that will be presented soon that is kind of, addressing important issues concerning other SDGs. For instance, you will clearly see the links between, the demand and the reduction of poverty, demand and the reduction of hunger, demand also, and the whole issue of sustainability and consumption and clean consumption, of course, climate change. So I think the whole idea of the demand being brought to the center is also something that is going to help us to understand fully and more comprehensively the whole Agenda 2030. I think also this report is very important because, you know, we are in the moment really where UNIDO is also talking about a new paradigm, the inclusive and sustainable development. And I think you won't be disappointed once you go through the report and you realize how important are the links that we are presenting there in the whole process of industrialization and demand, and really helping to UNIDO to realize, you know, the 9 goal on the Agenda 2030. So I probably should stop here, right? Because, yeah, I'm getting friendly smiles yet. But I just wanted to leave you with this. I think, you know, this is a very interesting report. It's really working on a very proud tradition, and I really hope you will enjoy it and you will sort of be able to discuss it much further among your colleagues and in the House as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cecilia. This report is the result of so much hard work by Shyam and his team. So I'm going to ask him now to come and just take us through not only some of the main findings, but also the results of the report and share with you this incredible work that they've managed to produce. So Shyam Upadhyaya, who is the Chief Statistician here at UNIDO, is going to share the delights of his baby, really, isn't it? You've worked so hard on this. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
So, Your Excellencies, members of the panel, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the report I am going to present to you is the product of a teamwork of policy advisors, researchers, and statisticians of our department. I feel privileged to represent them in presenting the report to the General Conference. Previous speakers already mentioned what the report is about. This time we have approached from the different perspective, from the perspective of consumption to the industrial development. I will go straight to the structure of the idea. It consists of 2 parts. First part is always about the theme, that is this time different dimension, different aspect of the consumption in industrial development. And second part, it has been standard, we present the global trends of industrial growth, employment, value added, as well as our research product, that is ranking the countries by their competitive industrial performance index. Now I'm going to the content of the report. First, importance of industrial development for consumers. The very definition of the manufacturing is the physical or chemical transformation of materials and substances into new products. Industrial development is the production of new goods. And not only the production of the new goods, it has been produced so many new goods that now these goods, these products have direct impact on our behavior, on the people, how they work, how they communicate, how they entertain. We cannot imagine anymore our office without the desktop computer. We cannot imagine going out without taking your mobile telephone or stopping the car or any other means of transportation. All these products are coming from manufacturing. And manufacturing has made these products more affordable to the large number of people, mainly because its price is falling. If we compare the overall price of economy and with the manufacturing, we can see that the manufacturing price rise is much less than other sectors. Since in last 25 years, aggregate price of manufactured goods has gone down by 27%. As a result, what happened? In industrialized countries, every household, almost every household has a personal computer, mobile phone, color television, vacuum cleaner, dishwasher. These all are the goods of manufacturing. Even in the developing countries, number of households consuming computer has increased almost to the 50%. We have presented there so many products you can see in the graph, manufactured products, how the consumption of these goods is rising. Only one item which is going down, if I can point it, no I cannot point it, it is the landline telephone. All others are going up. So manufacturing not only produce the goods, but these goods increase the welfare of consumers. Automobile, smartphones, washing machines, these products totally change the way we work. It changes the quality of our household, quality of our activities. Another important aspect that at the beginning of when these products come to the market, they are quite expensive, they are not very efficient. Early computers were very big, it took a lot of time for processing, but now we have computer in pocket, they are so fast, so good, and we do not realize, by the way, that this new quality of these goods are not always reflected in the price. So price reduction brings a real income effect as consumers can purchase more and different type of goods. That was the importance of manufacturing to the consumers. Now I am going to why consumers are important to the industrial development. For production is not done for its own sake. Production is for consumption. We produce the things so that somebody is going to consume it, to meet the demand of the consumers. And here in IDEA 2018, we have elaborated a concept of virtuous circles, how the consumption under the right set of conditions, this virtuous circle can set a motion of demand, diversification, and industrial development. My next slide is the circle itself, and on the top of the square, you can see the increase in discretionary income. We mentioned the Engels law. This is a law which says that when income grows, the proportion of the consumers in food expenses declines. Proportion. Absolute value may still rise, but the proportion declines. And when the income grows, the consumers start to buying other type of products, not necessarily food, clothes, other type of goods. So it increases the variety of the products that consumer wants to purchase. And it has the variety effect, diversification of the demand. We buy the more and more different type of goods. As the different type of goods are demanded, then the industries, the entrepreneurs want to capture this demand. So it has a volume effect. More productions are produced, more producers come to the market. And among them, there is always competition. There is they would increase their technology, they would increase the efficiency, and at the end, price comes down. Thanks to the productivity, thanks to efficiency, thanks to the competition and technology, price comes down. And we go back to the first round, first square, again the discretionary income increases. So again we go to this cycle. So as we can see that consumption brings or drives this development process, but demand can be internal from the domestic market and from external market. That were in IDR, in the IDR 2018, we look at the domestic market and external market separately. Domestic absorption is a key drive of income generation along the virtuous circle, especially in the developing economies. In industrialized economy, they do not depend that much in the domestic market. If you see in the graph in the right-hand side, the share of the domestic manufacturing is rising. There is one more important aspect, that is the equitable income, where our panelists will elaborate later more, that if only a small segment of the society has the ability to consume, this consumption will not bring to the diversification and industrial development because the market will be small. It is necessary that the income is spread out to the larger segment of the population. Then more people has the ability to purchase, and that grows the consumption, and that brings to the whole effect that what I just mentioned. Of course, there is also external demand, importance of the external demand. Again, especially for developing countries, because they need the foreign currency. But one more very important thing about the purchasing power. A few years ago, we conducted one study about the agricultural goods coming from Africa to Europe and agricultural machinery going from Europe to African countries. Imagine how much coffee you need to produce to export a tractor or combiner or any other agricultural machinery. But instead of beans, if you export the processed coffee, the value would be much higher. So the purchasing power of the export is very important. It is also important that where do you export? If you export to the high-income country, that your chances that your income from the export will be big is much different. Now I move to the manufacturing consumption. Yes, of course, we all know about the impact of industrial production on environment. If we continue to do so, what I said, that we all consume a lot, diversify, and increase the volume of industrial production, it will have a lot of impact on environment. As we see in this graph already, that our ecological footprint of industrial production is already much higher than the biological capacity. So already last 50 years, we are in the deficit territory. So when we talk about massification of the consumer goods, increasing the volume, we should also think about its impact on environment. Sustainability will be at risk. So the report we are presenting here says about environmental goods. And these environmental goods are those which have lower environmental impact in the production, do not pose the threat, and also require lower use of materials. But the problem is, so far, the share of environmental goods in total export is very, very small. You can see it is less than 5%, although it is growing. Now, it is the last section of my presentation. I will talk a little bit, few slides about the policy. Few years ago, people were talking about that industrial policy is not relevant. The best policy is absence of any industrial policy. I think that mentality has changed after the last financial crisis because we witnessed that the market can fail. So there is a role for the government action in industrial development. So this government action we can direct in the way that to generate the new demand, to improve the conditions for the demand. And some demand can be either a framework condition, which is outside the policy maker's control, or something that is actionable through public policy. In this report, we discuss the both scenario. Policy to capture from demand can be government playing the role of facilitator or capacity building partner, and also the market antenna. Many information related to the businesses can be generated or can be provided by the government, can be regulated. So this information is important for the private sector to improve their conditions. Environment, very important, we already mentioned, and government has a very important role to play to make the environment-friendly policies, carbon prices policies, and other regulations. And all these activities should be done in close cooperation with the private sector. When we said that government has the role to play, we do not want to say to go back to the total government control. No, government as a facilitator, private sector still remains the producer. In this report, we have also presented a number of examples of the UNIDO technical cooperation projects that are directly related how UNIDO activities have directed to generate the demand in developing countries. The food security, market access, quality standards, and of course, quite important work of UNIDO, phasing out ozone-depleting substances through Montreal Protocol. These are the concrete work we have done in developing countries. So I would not see an industrial development report as a purely theoretical, academic, conceptual document. No, we have brought this conceptual issue all the way down to the practical aspect, how UNIDO itself implemented these things to improve the industrial situation in the country and to generate more demand. This is my last slide. Key message of this IDR 2018. First of all, consumption. Core topic of this is the consumption. Consumption is the key driver of industrial development, and consumption is important to meet the Sustainable Development Goal, especially Goal 9, which is about industrialization. Industrialization improves our living standard. It generates income. It provides sophisticated goods. It develops technology. So all these things are clearly elaborated and mentioned in the report. This is one of the key messages of IDR. And the last thing is how to make industrial development sustainable. We do recognize and realize that the massification of production has the impact on the environment, but it is manufacturing that produces the important technology, techniques that production becomes environmentally sustainable. Thank you very much.
Shyam, thank you very much. I'm going to stay seated here for the next part of this session, which is a panel discussion where we can drill down perhaps into some of the issues that the report highlights. And I'd like to introduce you to our panellists. John Weiss is with us from the University of Bradford, Fiona Tregena from the University of Johannesburg, and Mashiko Nasanke from SOAS in London. And we met beforehand and had a discussion about the report. And I thought it would be useful to start because they each shared with me why they feel a report like this is important and what it contributes. So if I could start, John, perhaps with you, just telling us why, for you, this is an important report.
Well, the way I would put it is that manufacturing offers great potential to countries, particularly low-income countries, in terms of raising productivity and creating employment. But it's a potential, and we have to examine the constraints. And one of the constraints that has arguably perhaps not been as examined as intensely as it might have been is the issue of demand. And I think the report sheds new light on that.
Fiona?
Yeah, I think the way that it brings together the manufacturing matters story and the demand matters story. That on the one hand, even with the rise of services and deindustrialization in some parts of the world, manufacturing still matters more than is commonly thought. And on the other hand, even with all of the emphasis, importantly, on supply, demand still matters. And the way that the report brings these together that in order to increase and to meet demand, both domestically and in terms of exports, manufacturing has a particular role to play, and policy needs to respond to that.
Mashiko. Oh, press your button.
It creates roadmaps for creating a virtuous cycle of manufacturing consumption, both at global level and national level, and linking specifically how to achieve SDGs in triple dimensions: ecological, social, economic, sustainability. Analysis explicitly make inquiry from demand perspective to understand the mechanism of so-called demand-driven industrialization and potentially creating win-win-win situation. And it's very important analytical inquiries with many policy discussions, practical policy discussions, with presenting rich empirical evidences and historical experiences. But as far as we see, it is a potential of demand, manufacturing demand-driven industrialization. And realities, this virtuous circle, this report present, are not necessarily observed universally or automatically. This price, volume, variety effect cannot happen automatically. And also it creates not necessarily win-win situation, but winner-losers globally and locally. So this report is tackle these issues very clearly, explicitly.
One of the things I found interesting about the report was that it highlights the relative importance of manufacturing that is increasing and not decreasing at a global level. And as a layperson looking at that, I thought that was a really important finding and interesting as well. So Fiona, I wondered why it is then that some developing countries are actually now facing a process of what seems like premature deindustrialization.
Well, yes, Lucy, this is a really important insight of the report that, when you look at the trend in constant terms, in constant prices, we don't actually have global deindustrialization. But what we do have is quite a lot of heterogeneity amongst countries. And we do have many countries, which are deindustrializing in real terms. And I think this is of particular concern, as you've said, in cases of premature deindustrialization. So countries which are deindustrializing at lower levels of income per capita and lower shares of manufacturing in GDP and employment than is typical internationally. And in some cases, particularly in some low-income African countries, this is before the countries have even really fully industrialized in any real sense. I think typically where we find instances of premature deindustrialization, this is usually associated with policy. This is not cases of advanced economies gradually maturing and deindustrializing over time, but it's typically triggered by perhaps a rapid tariff liberalization or austere fiscal and monetary policy that actually kicks off this kind of premature deindustrialization and can have potentially negative impacts on growth.
We're going to come back to that and what policies do work a bit later. But John, if I could bring you in, the focus in the report on environmental goods as well being very important in terms of being able to have sustainable development. How do you think policymakers can sort of steer things towards a production that is more sustainable?
Okay, thank you. These are very big questions, and the way I would see it is that the report highlights all of the big issues. It talks about introducing consumer awareness campaigns, labelling, the creation of appropriate environmental standards for products. But I think the key answers, which are all in there and maybe need to be brought out a little bit more, I would highlight three issues. Perhaps most obvious from the economist's point of view is the pricing question. We know that environmental impacts are what economists describe as externalities, And we know there are two things you can do about an externality. If it's a so-called bad effect, you can tax it. If it's a good effect, you can subsidize it. And the report gives examples of both in the environmental area. A tax on plastic bags in Ireland and a subsidy for electric cars in China. The only comment that I would make here is that politically it's a lot easier to subsidise something, but in fiscal terms, you really need to be looking at the tax side of things if you are going to alter behaviour, and there simply will not be the so-called fiscal space in the vast majority of countries to actually subsidise enough to shift consumer patterns in the environmentally friendly way that the report is hoping for. The other issues that I would stress relate, of course, to innovation, and the report has some very useful statistical analysis of trends in CO2 emissions. And you can read the story in different ways. At a global level, we still see CO2 emissions rising. The rise is relatively low, as I read it, in the higher income countries, but it's still a rise associated with the increase in manufacturing production. And the analysis in the report helpfully distinguishes between a scale effect and an environmental intensity effect. So the environmental intensity effect is the ratio of the CO2 impact per unit of manufacturing value added. And in most parts of the world, that is reducing. So it's counteracting the effect of the scale effect. And clearly, in the long run, what has to happen is for this environmental intensity dimension to be improved further through innovation. And this is a major challenge. It will require almost certainly public funding, direct state support for research and development in that area, but it almost certainly also will require some cooperation between governments and the private sector. And the last comment that I would make on this innovation side, the report also distinguishes between the environmental impact of manufacturing in different parts of the world. And in the lowest income countries, there is still no evidence of an improvement in terms of the environmental intensity side of things. And that has to occur in the longer run if global targets are to be met. So there is a technology transfer dimension to this. The innovating countries have to be able to provide the technology that will allow the lower income followers to apply the sort of technological innovation that will help bring down the environmental impact that the report is rightly concerned about. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, John. The report emphasises the importance of improving income distribution, and it probably seems obvious to you that if we do that, we can foster domestic demand. But Mashiko, you mentioned this when you spoke earlier about the issue of income inequality, and I wonder if you could just elaborate about how you see income inequality being a barrier to economic development.
Scale and the way income inequality taking place globally is really staggering, and within nations and between nations, that inequality is increasing. And why this is a problem, partly, I would like to look at this particularly in terms of functional income distribution between labor and capital, and how that happened under globalization so far proceeded. And basically what we observe is labor income, particularly income, unskilled labor, has been decisively declining relative terms in relation to capital income. And what happens, as Xian already alluded, that the domestic demand, expanding market size are very important, and this cannot happen at the backdrop of declining labor income. Too often, wage cost is seen as means of increasing only competitiveness, raising competitiveness, maintaining it, and there is a tendency to suppress that labor income. But in the long run, if you have a situation globally and locally, if shrinking aggregate demand, of course, that will not create a virtuous circle. And it is very important, as the report says, massification, declining relative prices of mass product consumption is a very important part of the story of a virtuous circle. And this sort of income distribution is not sustainable socially and economically. So we have to think labor income, wage cost much more from Keynesian perspective, which is part of effective demand, rather than just cost. And even cost, labor cost, important is productivity adjusted labor cost. You cannot have situations, labor conditions are poor and the labor rights are not protected, then environmentally and socially it is not sustainable. And that's why this report, focusing on demand side, will bring up very clearly how important to address and counter this declining share of labor income, particularly unskilled labor. And the rise of populism will point to you that if you have this declining share of unskilled labor, then it is also politically unsustainable. So this report is right on that point. Thank you.
That's fascinating. I wanted to return to this policy issue. You'll notice in the report, if you've got it, the talk of this virtuous circle in manufacturing consumption. And Mashiko just referred to it there as well. I mean, Fiona, that just sounds very easy and looks quite easy, actually, when you see it on a graph. Obviously harder to achieve. What sort of policies do you think need to be put in place for us to achieve this virtuous circle?
I think that countries need really a suite of complementary and supportive policies to try and achieve and sustain this virtuous circle. Industrial policy is obviously absolutely essential. Without industrial policy, it's not going to happen. But industrial policy alone is not enough. So, for example, countries also need effective competition policy or antitrust policy, because without that, the price channel won't operate. So you might have the massification of demand, but without that translating into lower prices and increase in discretionary incomes, which is so crucial to that virtuous circle. You need appropriate trade policy, because if you have wholesale tariff liberalization and import penetration, that's going to represent leakages from this virtuous circle, which won't be sustainable. Crucially, you need supportive macroeconomic policy. I think if you have contractionary monetary policy with, for example, uncompetitive exchange rates and interest rates, which make it too difficult for businesses to expand, that's not going to be supportive of industrial development. You need attention to distribution. As the report points out, the more egalitarian income distribution is, the more supportive it can be of this kind of demand-led path. So obviously it's not easy to get all of these policies right and working together, but at the same time, if you just concentrate on one aspect without coordinating with other aspects of policy, it's not going to be able to support this kind of virtuous circle, and countries might find themselves instead in a vicious cycle.
Fiona, thank you. We have a bit of time, and I know we started a bit late, to take questions from you all. I hope a few of you have a few burning questions. Can you make sure that they're directed to the person you'd like to answer them? Could you say your name, please, and could you keep them reasonably brief, because we are short on time. Do we have some questions? There must be someone out there with a question. I have a few more here. I can keep going. Does no one want to take the opportunity? There's a lot to talk about. Okay, I'll keep going then. John, we spoke earlier about, and everyone has mentioned this focus in the report on demand. The report focuses on demand, and we've talked a lot about that. Can you tell us what matters so much about demand, why it matters so much in terms of growth and development?
Well, as was said at the outset, for production you need markets, and Fiona's just been highlighting that it's very difficult to have a dynamic manufacturing sector in an economy where there's severe restrictions on fiscal and monetary policy, unless you have an extremely active policy on the exchange rate side, where you divert all of your demand to the external sector. So manufacturing can't be immune from the macro trends in the economy. The current policy challenge is that in a different era, some decades back, the starting point for industrialization was generally seen as some form of protective strategy for the home market, which of course made some sense for larger economies. But in the current trade liberalization era, even if you have import tariffs of 20 or 30%, they're unlikely to be an appropriate policy instrument to stimulate demand. Experience has shown that unless the import tariff protection is relatively short-lived, it sends out the wrong signals, and that all you end up doing is sheltering high-cost producers, and you will impose a cost on consumers because of the higher cost involved. So the challenge for industrial policy in the current climate is to find ways of supporting the industrial sector. And this will almost inevitably mean some selectivity, that it's very difficult to offer broad-based incentives. You have to establish what you think your key priorities areas are, establish what you think the constraints are in developing those areas, and this will involve some sort of dialogue with the producers in the sector to set out an appropriate policy agenda. I'll stop there.
So we're out of time. Thank you so much to the panel. That was a fantastic discussion. Thank you. I think the key findings, as I see it, that I think we really need to highlight is about consumption being a key driver of industrial development, that industrialisation can improve our living standards, and that the consumption of manufactured goods, of course, has an impact on the environment and the things that we can do, perhaps, to reduce that through technological innovations and also the development of environmental goods. I'd like to congratulate everyone involved in producing the report. It is quite a read. And before I wrap up, I have a very important announcement for you all. Now, this is to do with what is happening next. Thailand is organising a side event on the Eastern Economic Corridor as an integrated development policy towards achieving inclusive and sustainable growth. The important points are it's happening at 4:30 in front of the board on the second floor, board A and C. But perhaps the most important thing about the event, I hope you're all listening clearly because this will encourage you to go. All of the delegates are invited to join the discussion, and most importantly, you get to take home some snacks from Thailand. Now, I'm sure you all love Thai food as much as I do. That is more. There are many reasons to go, and that perhaps is the cherry on the icing of the cake. Thank you so much for coming today. It's been good to see you all. Take some time to read the report, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.